Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, December 21st, 2023 meeting of the school committee. I would invite those who are here in the studio to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so I just want to start out by welcoming Lori Nickerson to the committee. I'm very happy to have you, and although Adam is not here tonight, it will be nice to have a full committee and to bring your experience back. So welcome.
Thank you.
I do not see anybody here in the public for public comment, so we can go into recognitions. Does anybody have any recognitions?
I would like to recognize our fire department, police department, Mr. Person, who managed somehow to stay up all night long, Monday into Tuesday, and restore power to us at 3:45 a.m. Working with Eversource, I know that they were probably haunting Eversource, but I think that it was just that communication that was ongoing and making the schools a priority. So we got back to school on Tuesday, thankfully.
That was great.
And I would just like to give a shout out to the music department. I got a chance to go to the high school concert last night, jazz band, jazz ensemble, or jazz lab, and the high school concert band, and it was great as always. And I just love the music program. I love seeing 80 or 100 kids on a stage who in isolation have been practicing like maybe not that exciting a part if it's the bass line or their individual piece is not always that fun to rehearse, but then when you bring them all together, the way they play with each other and the communication, and just the creativity and the attention and respect for Mr. Hay as a director, it just was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience. They all sounded great, and it's exciting. So,
All right, that brings us then into reports. I'm going to start off with you, Jack.
Hello. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my report this evening. The high school has been in high spirits lately with winter break right around the corner. I'd like to begin my report by mentioning our recent award winners at the high school. For the 2023 poetry contest, the high school saw a record of 63 submissions from students, which is an all-time high. Among these submissions were 2 honorable mentions, as well as this year's runner-up and winner of the contest. The winner of the contest was May Chen, who was awarded for her poem Diorama of Woman. This is May's second straight win in the poetry contest. While on the topic of winning, the high school celebrated the Hopkinton High School Hopkinetics 2602E for bringing home the Design Award hardware recently in Framingham at the VEX Robotic Tournament. Looking forward to more opportunities. The Hopkinton High School Quiz Show team has earned a televised spot on Season 15 of the High School Quiz Show. Their match will take place on Saturday, January 20th at 11 at the GBH Calderwood Studio in Boston. That wraps up our awards from the past few weeks. As for performances, the high school music department held its Winter concerts this past week. This included the jazz and concert bands and the chorus and orchestra performances that took place recently. Both concerts are on HCAM if anyone who missed the show is interested. Lastly, winter sports have officially kicked off. The girls' basketball team won their home opener, but now sits at 1-2 after their first 3 games. The team has its annual Mary Corby tournament next week. The boys' basketball team is 2-1 after their first 3 games. Their next game is tomorrow, Friday, in Milford. Boys hockey is 3-0-1 through their first 4 games. The wrestling team, swim team, and the track team have also gotten off to a good start. Thank you.
Great.
Could you repeat the date of the quiz show?
The quiz show is on Saturday, January 20th at 11 o'clock.
WGBH, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions for Jack? All right, then let's move into our financial report. Mrs. Rotherman.
Thank you. Carol, do you want me to? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yep. Make this big enough
for the world to see. So thank you. This is the financial report through December 18th. As you can see, at this time, we are running with a positive variance in payroll of $339,000, but a negative variance with expenses of $292,000, leaving us at this time with a positive variance of $46,516. The expense variances, if you go down, is in the student services, $155,000, and these are in the contracted services, and these are based on student needs. Building and grounds, $21,000 for repairs and other projects. Utilities were $69,000 behind, and that is based on the solar delays. New equipment, this is $22,000. These are copier leases that were initiated for copiers that were no longer functioning, and these leases were not budgeted. We are running $9,000 over in translations and about $14,000 over in other expenses. Looking at the payroll, just as a reminder, the positions that have come before the school committee at this time, Marathon Special Education Professionals, 3 were added in the spring of '23, that Dr. Zaleski had come and requested those. Elmwood Special Education Teaching of .5, Elmwood Special Education Paraprofessional 1, and Hopkins Paraprofessional of 1, middle school teaching and high school teaching of 1. Those positions were all added in the fall of '23. And down below, you can see that the middle school and the high school, 2 positions each were not filled, and that was to cover the teaching that were added up above. And then also the increase to the preschool revolving of $110,000 was to cover the 3 FTE paraprofessionals that were proposed in the spring. So you can see the net positions we have is costing us $46,000. Positions added were $286,000, but the reduced and the offset of revolving was $239,000. So the impact of all those at this time is $46,000. So that's a big piece of what's going on with the payroll. When you go to the cover page in terms of the payroll accounts, personnel attrition right now is running at a positive of $409,000. And a lot of that is attributed to delays in hiring. So as you know, just based on those special education positions, some positions are taking months to fill, and that's the hiring climate that we're in. So that has resulted in positive attrition for our budget. So at this time, again, we're running at a positive variance of $46,516. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee?
I have a couple questions. Let me remember what they are. Okay, just on the revolving accounts, the parking, I'm just wondering if our receipts have been dramatically impacted by the solar install. I know we were unable to allow quite as many juniors to get parking passes, I think, as would have liked maybe in a normal year. So are we okay with where we're tracking, and has it been impacted very much?
So for parking, most of your revenue comes in the spring.
Okay.
So students are buying their parking pass in the spring for the next fall.
Okay.
So then during the year, there are a couple that are buying, which are the juniors that are coming of age. So we have not lost revenue, because it does trickle in, and as those parking spaces are reopening, it's not an issue.
Okay. Good to know. It seems almost impossible that we could take up a chunk of a parking lot and not feel a net loss to our student parking, but I'll take your word for it.
It's a timing thing.
Yeah.
So, when they're allowed to get that permit and when they actually come of age.
Yeah.
It's all a timing.
Okay.
Are there more cars being parked further out to allow for the spaces in the middle school? And
You'd be surprised where people find a place to park.
not sure I want to know that.
Do they issue parking tickets if they park
They
in an
do.
unusual spot?
They do.
Sticking
They'll get warnings first.
Sticking with the revolving accounts, and this is related to the food services asks that we had last meeting and coming up later. From what I understand, we are funding those asks with the revolving account.
Correct.
And, I'm not, like Susan, I'm not really, great at reading all the financial reports, but it looks like our total receipts versus our encumbered are quite close. And so I'm just wondering, are we comfortable with where we are in terms of being able to fund the position we approved last meeting as well as what's coming up?
So the piece that you always have to keep in mind with the revolving accounts is the expenses are recorded immediately. Revenue is at least a month, sometimes 2 months behind.
Yeah,
So looking just at the cafeteria, revenue has only been posted through October.
okay,
So you are short both November and December receipts.
okay.
However, your expenses are true.
Through
this
through
day.
today, okay,
So you're 2 months behind in revenue.
okay. That helps. That makes me, because they're almost even. I mean, they're close to even. We do have a cushion, but I think we like to keep a cushion, so.
Correct.
Just want to make sure we were comfortable.
Yeah, and the other piece to keep in mind with the encumbered, because of the increase that we're seeing, we put in another walk-in freezer at the high school.
Yeah.
To hold more food because of the increased capacity. So in terms of the encumbrance moving forward, you won't see that again. So that was a hit for this year, but it's not a recurring expense.
I feel better already. Thank you. Excellent, glad I asked. And my last question on revolving accounts, and then I'll leave everything be. This special education student reserve that we fund at $1,094,024, I see that we have encumbered more than that by 120, is that right? So how do we do that? Doesn't that just go to our budget?
So there was a correction that had to happen after the financial report of some of the purchase orders.
Okay,
So that has been corrected.
thank you. All good.
What does that mean, that they were corrected?
So, as the Student Services Department is creating purchase orders for tuitions, they charged too many to that account. So what needed to happen is that purchase order needed to be moved from that special education reserve account into the regular operating account. So that negative amount that you see there now has moved into the operating.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of amending the purchase order account number.
I'm in awe of you. Absolute awe.
I do have one quick question, but, you have to forgive me if this is something that's been discussed in earlier meetings, but the personnel attrition, you talked about, it's the lag in being able to hire, which I completely understand, but is there, and this is a question that's a bit unfair because you haven't had any time to prepare for it, but like in terms of attrition generally and across the schools, do we find that there is attrition happening with the staff in general, or people are leaving, or is this really all attributed to being able to fill positions that we need people for?
Well, you do have, so from the time of the budget, we've had people that are budgeted at, say, a high salary, and then they leave the system and we're able to hire at a lower salary. So you do have staff changeovers, which has also benefited that positive attrition, if you will.
Okay.
So you have kind of a couple of factors happening at the same time. So yes, you do have staff turnover where we've been able to hire at lower rates
Lower
as well.
rates. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That moves us then into the superintendent's report, Dr. Kavanaugh.
All right, thank you. This is the superintendent's report for Thursday evening, December 21st, 2023, the last of this year. God, it wasn't even over. right, so I did want to talk about our early dismissal on Monday. So on Monday morning, as you know, it was very rainy outside. And I think getting kids to school wasn't really a terrific problem. You know, I think we had talked a little bit to you and Allison on Monday morning, and most of the roads were clear and our buses were getting through without a problem, and I don't even think kids were really late to school on Monday morning. But after we were there, it was about 8:30, 8:40-ish, and all of a sudden the lights went out, and we were like, oh boy. So when that happens, maybe the public is interested to know how things start to unfold. So the first phone call we make is to Mr. Person, who calls the fire department, who calls Eversource, and they have a dialogue about how quickly do you think you can restore the power. And what we learned was that, you know, with power outages all over the state, you know, we would be put on a priority list, but it was obviously not going to happen before the end of the school day. So when we know that, all of our generators are running at that point in time. But our middle school and high school classrooms, they don't get lighted when that happens. So areas like bathrooms, you know, their interior, they have no windows, those would be lighted. All of the hallways are lighted. But really, even the blowers for the heating systems aren't blowing heat. There is heat, but, you know, it ends up being radiant heat, not blown heat. So there our kids are. The internet can sometimes become a little bit spotty. So if you're a high school student, for example, you're sitting in what's predominantly a dark classroom, your internet is a little bit spotty. But what really starts to be a problem is we realize that the high school and middle school cafeterias do not run on the generators. So we would not be able to produce food for the 2,000 kids who are sitting in those buildings. Interestingly, Hopkins cafeteria does run on the generator. And Hopkins actually has lights in the classroom, lights in the hallways. So if you went to Hopkins, it would be very difficult for you to tell that you were running on a generator. If you walked into the high school or the middle school, it would not be challenging at all. In the middle school on that day, we really didn't have working telephones or internet. So when we decided that we were going to dismiss at 11 o'clock, the administration really had to go door to door and make the announcement in every single one of those classrooms because there was really no other way to disseminate that information. The last thing that was a little bit of a problem on that day is there is something called a repeater, and the repeater sends messages from inside the buses so that if a bus driver is on his walkie, that information gets to the bus dispatcher who's housed in the White House. And that was kind of on and off as well. So there were a lot of things going on. It's very stressful when you think we have about 4,200 kids and we've got to get them into buses at 11 o'clock and then at 12 o'clock, the second wave of them, and get them all home. I know that in that period around 11 o'clock, that was about when the storm was its worst, and there were roads where we couldn't get buses through, but that's how the procedure went. We were very lucky that we have parents who, when we say Spring Street is entirely closed in one space, you're going to have to come back to the school and grab your children, that they can, and a lot of good communication there. So thank you to Mrs. Rothermick and Allison Caffarella, who work in transportation, and all of our building principals and bus drivers. And I mean, it all works out in the end somehow, but it feels very stressful while it's happening.
What's different about Hopkins generator from the other ones?
I don't know, we would have to ask Mr. Person that technical
Is it the
question.
generator itself allows the entire building to be lit as opposed to?
So I can speak a little to that. So, I mean, what happens when the buildings were built, first of all, you want to think about the size of Hopkins School compared to like the high school as a, for instance. The capacity of the generator is allowed how many things you're able to hook up to that generator. So when the Hopkins generator was installed, which was after the building actually opened, they hooked up pretty much the entire building. When the middle school and the high school generator were installed, the size of the building, not the entire building was hooked up. So it just became that, what was done when those generators were installed.
Will the new Elmwood have a generator system like that?
Yes.
Excellent.
So, question, and it's okay if you don't know the answer right now, but they're not able to serve lunches out of the middle school and high school. Are the freezers and refrigeration systems on the generator?
Those are on the
Okay.
generator, yeah. The
Good.
big difference is the cooking line or
Sure.
the serving line at Hopkins is on, so they can cook, they can serve, and the food would stay at temp. That does not happen at the middle school, high school, but the walk-in refrigerator and freezers are on the generators.
I was thinking about the potential spoilage of food.
Food loss, yes.
So Jack, other than the cheers, do you want to talk about what the experience is like in the building?
It was pretty interesting. So I personally came into school late because I had first period study. So when I came into school, the power was out, and there were a lot of kids sort of congregating around the senior high tops outside the library. And initially I thought there were a lot of people there because some teachers had let class out early. But eventually the hall monitors and the administration got everyone like sorted out into their classrooms by second period. And I think that was one of like the main problems they wanted to focus on, was keeping kids out of the hallway, and like they sort of restricted our abilities to leave. They were like, only go to the bathroom, when normally you can go to the cafeteria and get breakfast sometimes that's offered. And so that was the only part I saw restricted. And within the classroom, the teachers had to work without their projectors and without sort of their lesson plans. So we played, whether it was like games at the front of the classroom or we went over stuff that had already been printed out. So it was overall handled really well. I didn't notice anything that would have been off about not having power, but overall I'd say it was handled well. Yeah.
Were there seniors who were hoping for a different outcome of the power restoration on Tuesday? Not you personally, of course.
There was a lot of talk on Tuesday night or Monday night that we may not have school tomorrow, but no one really knew. And then it came about that the decision time would be about like 5 a.m. I think the next morning. So a lot of kids just went to bed. They might have put a spoon under their pillow for a snow day, but that was about it. Yeah.
I think you do have one liaison who emails me,
I do?
the senior class.
Oh, yeah.
What's a spoon under the pillow about?
That's for snow days, I believe. Yeah.
Never heard that. Is that one of those New England things?
No, wait, if that's
It's just superstition.
I've never
Maybe
heard
that's an
that.
INLE thing.
Never heard of that.
All right, just a couple of things. High happenings at HHS, I think these have already been covered, band and orchestra concerts. The Jewish Student Union had a Hanukkah party, and there will be Ugly Sweater Day. Has that already happened, Jack?
Oh,
Is
no,
today?
that'll be Friday.
Tomorrow, right?
Yeah, tomorrow.
And then at the middle school, I couldn't help myself. Mr. LeBron and I had a great time today. We went and visited classrooms at the middle school. And, you know, I think sometimes people believe that because you're in those last couple of days before you're going to go on December break, that kids are, you know, doing things that may not be so academically rigorous. And that was really dispelled for us today. I think in every one of those classrooms, amazing teaching and learning was happening. But you may not be able to see it, but Carrie Thornton Geneva, who is the science teacher in this picture, that thing that she's holding right there is an enormous earthworm. So these kids were doing dissection today. And we went into, nothing says happy holidays like worm dissection day, but we also went into another science class who had done their worms last week, and they were doing sheep's eyes. So it was, yeah, they were working.
Did you say sheep size?
Yeah, sheep's eyes,
Oh, sheep's eyes.
yeah, sorry. That all ran together.
No, I thought you meant a worm that was the size of a sheep.
Sheep size.
Yeah.
Is that 8th grade? 8th grade that was dissected?
Were they 8th graders?
Sixth grade.
Oh, it was
Yeah, it was 6th grade,
Sixth
yeah.
grade.
Yep.
Oh, my God. I think I remember that in my sophomore year.
And just some marathon and Elmwood stuff. You can see we have a great writing lesson going on over there on the left-hand side. And I couldn't help but take a picture of Michelle Tynan today, who's the assistant principal at Elmwood, because everything she is wearing says Elmwood School on it. So a lot of great things happening. And that's all. Just wishing everyone a peaceful and joyous and a lot of downtime over December break.
Any questions for Dr. Kavanaugh? Thank you. And also, I know that it wasn't just Mr. Person. I know that the entire administration was really working hard between that Monday and Tuesday to make sure things were safe and smooth. And I know that the teachers at the middle school and the high school had to pivot a little bit with technology not being available in the same way. Okay, so that moves us into the school committee chair report, and payroll warrants 24010, 24011, and 24012 have been approved. Warrant 24-029S, 24-030S, and 24-031S have been approved and included in your folder. I don't really have anything else to report since we did meet last week and the week before, and I think the week before that. So are there liaison reports that people have?
We had the E ESBC2 meeting.
We did.
It was brief.
It
We-
was
we
like
paid
11
bills.
minutes.
We paid bills. I think I can't even remember anything else of substance from that meeting that would be of general
Yeah, no, I
interest.
don't.
I think it was mostly administrative, and the next meeting is in January.
That was storm related?
No, it was the
Oh.
ESBC2 was to pay bills.
No, but the meeting
Regular.
was short.
Oh, no, it was just a regular meeting.
Oh,
It just
okay.
wasn't a lot of
To do
things.
business, yeah, there was not much business to do.
So when we come back in January, we're going to talk about our liaison roles and talk about, so we can shift to see what everybody's interested in, so that, Lori, you're not just stuck with what's left over. We can figure out what's working for people and what people are interested in specifically. So everybody has lots to think about over the break for what exciting liaison roles you want in January. All right, so that brings us then into the superintendent's FY25 budget recommendations.
All right, thank you. So this is really our second time presenting this recommended budget. We did it last week in the presence of the Select Board and the Appropriations Committee. And so as we do every year, we try to be fiscally responsible, and this year we did that also in responding to shifts in demographics and student needs. That was a big focus for us. We wish to maintain Hopkinton's exceptional educational and extracurricular programs, to offer curriculum and instruction that meets the needs of every learner, including their academic, behavioral, mental health, special education, and social emotional needs. We accommodate enrollment growth and support all of the 5 building principals' school improvement plans. What you're seeing on this slide is the enrollment projections that were prepared for us by Dr. Arthur Wagman. The 23-24 school year indicates that by June of '24, we should have 4,186 students. That's what the FY24 budget was built on. Today, we have 4,217. As we prepared the FY25 budget, we built that based on a prediction of 4,290 students, and so you can see that on Dr. Wagman's table here, and that is essentially what we would expect to have in June of 2025. So I wanted to take the 4,217 and break that down a little bit for you. As I said, we're about 31 students right now over where we budgeted for, and we remember again that that number is the number that we believe we would have in the spring or in June of '24. So running only 31 students above feels pretty controlled right now, and as we built the budget and we took a look at where we were in terms of student enrollment, even though we have those 31 extra students, we really asked only for staffing that met very, very specific and kind of carefully considered needs. The other thing that I want to point out before leaving this slide are the numbers for grades 4 and 5. Currently, this is current enrollment, there's 332 in grade 4 and 352 in grade 5 for a total of 684 students at the Hopkins School today. One other thing that's interesting on here is the pre-K numbers, with 99 students approved and 6 pending approval to get us to 105 students. Just so we remember, when we were opening the Marathon School, I think we had just about 50 kids in pre-K, so that program has more than doubled. So I had said that what we were looking to do is to make sure that we were asking for things in very careful and meaningful ways, things that were based on demographics. And so when Mrs. DeBow came to us with her request, she asked for a .5 adjustment counselor, and these are all the educator asks. And these are only the things that the principals were looking for. That takes Marathon's school adjustment counselor head count to 2.0 FTEs. That matches what all the other buildings have, or at least the other elementary buildings have. And we are seeing student behaviors there that really warrant going from 1.5 FTEs to 2.0 FTEs. At the Elmwood School, Mr. Broninger is asking for 1.2 math teachers, and essentially he wants 2.6 positions. We have had those positions in place. Previously, they were grant funded. And really, when we look at the salaries that we're paying to our math tutors and the incredible advantage it is to have two people at 0.6 who are helping students who are struggling in math try to get back up to benchmark, the work that they're doing is incredible and the kids are making growth. So that is why Mr. Broninger is asking for the 1.2. Mr. Cotter was looking for a .05 music teacher, and as I said last week, when you look at this, you might think that's a typographical error. It must be a .5 music teacher, but it's really not. This is just a request that's in response to student enrollment growth. We have about 140 students in that school who are taking chorus right now, and with an additional .05, we'll be able to break that class into 70 and 70, which feels much more manageable, and it's really good for teaching and learning. At the middle school, Mr. Lefebvre is looking for a .2 Mandarin teacher. Again, the request is made in response to student enrollment numbers. We currently offer 3 sections of Mandarin Chinese in grades 7 and 8, and next year there will be 4 in grades 7 and 8. So it's nice to see that program growing. At the high school, Mr. Bishop is asking for a 1.0 teacher. He does not have a specific department in which he'll hire that teacher, but the outgoing senior class tends to be a smaller one, and the incoming 8th grade class is 32 students greater. So his plan is to take the 1.0 FTE and break that up very likely into English and social studies classes, depending upon what student enrollment numbers look like after we go through the scheduling process, course selection process in March. This is a new slide from last week, and I know that sometimes people say, well, what were the asks that did not move forward? And I think this is a nice illustration of our our fiscal responsibility. We say that we budget fiscally responsibly, but it's nice to show people that we truly do. So Elmwood Hopkins in the middle school, we had originally presented to you a number of copiers. 6 of those copiers have been taken out of the budget across those 3 schools. At $3,200 apiece, it totals $19,200 in reduction. Technology, Dr. Ghosh had some projectors in the budget, and there were also some software in there. The projectors, I think, were new. The software was renewals, and those were reduced by about $22,000. At Hopkins, Mr. Cotter was looking for some art room tables in the amount of $12,000, and we really just decided on that one to kind of tap the brakes because we're in the midst of an enormous construction project there. We didn't want to start getting into furniture and fixtures and those kinds of things while approaching the project. We thought maybe on the other side of it, it made better sense to look at those tables. Building and grounds, Mr. Person had, that he has requested a 1.0 assistant as well as a custodian. He had originally requested 2 custodians. We reduced that by 1, so there was a reduction of $51,000 there. At the middle school, Mr. Lefebvre was looking for a family engagement liaison. And that's really an interesting position. There are other districts who have sort of almost registration centers for families. So when you come in, there is someone there to help you if you need any kind of interpretation services, someone there to assist you if you need any kind of health care so that you can get your health records up to speed, to take you through the entire registration process, to look at financial aid forms with you, all of that. We obviously do not have that across our entire district, but DESE has been providing all kinds of professional learning about these positions, and Mr. Lefebvre was wondering if we needed that kind of a position for our district. We don't think we're at that threshold yet. And the person who's sort of technically doing that work right now is Jen Suker, whose other half of her position, in addition to being the L director, is also our Director of Equity and Access. So she really does do an awful lot of families who not just need interpretation, but sometimes she helps them with the entire registration form, with building a schedule, getting them health care. So, and I will say our public health officials are super helpful in working, in tandem with us on those pieces. So that's what we're doing for right now, and that was eliminated as a request. Mr. Lebrad was looking for a science and technology director for K-5. We tapped the brakes on that one as well because currently this year we have someone coming in doing sort of an entire curriculum audit K-5. So it would be really helpful, I think, to see what her findings are before we put that position forward. And in the technology department, Dr. Ghosh was looking for another technician and another system administrator. Currently, we have 2 folks who are working in systems administration. One of the ways that we sort of mitigated that second ask is that Mr. Lebrad is going to be getting a .8 assistant to be shared between him and our director of English language acquisition, equity, and access. And so that will mean that Megan Cox, who is now a shared administrative assistant to Mr. Lebrad and Dr. Ghosh, will go entirely to Dr. Ghosh's side. So she will certainly be able to, I think, help a little bit with some of the system administration needs. So those are the things that didn't get there. And when you look at the total, it's about $464,200. It gets very close to almost being a 1%. So. All right, so let's talk about some of the student data and what that data is telling us and how that impacts the budget. We know we have more students now with special education needs. We have fewer students with English learner needs. And we've had an increased overall enrollment at Hopkins that we believe translates to the need for an additional building-based administrator. So what you're seeing on the screen are special education student counts for fiscal years 19 through 22. So in FY19, we had 442 kids. That went to 464 in 2020, 476 in 2021, and 480 in 2022. If we looked at the number that we have enrolled today, we have 614 students who qualify for special education services. 35 of those students receive services outside of the district. So how does that look when we compare that to our special education teachers? And we have to be careful to remember these are not the related service providers, but these are actual special education teachers. If you take a look at the bar graph, and this comes from DESE's radar data, they put this out for every community in the state, you can see the orange bar, the first bar in the graph, is Hopkinton. And down below, it lets you know that we have 7.3 FTEs, or 7.3 teachers, for every 100 students with disabilities. When you look across those bars, you can see that Wayland is at about 10 teachers for every 100 students. Westboro is about 10 teachers for every 100 students. And that's where Hopkinton used to be. So if we look at this line graph, also produced by DESE, in 2019, Hopkinton was at 10 teachers for every 100 students with disabilities. So doing the math, that tells us that the average caseload was 10. Now, you know that there are folks at the high school who have over 20 people on their caseload, and there are some people who are maybe intensive programs who have 7 people on their caseload. At any rate, that number has gone down to 8.4 in 2020, back up to 9.3 in 2021, down to 8.8 in 22. But when we got to 2023 and saw the 7.3, we knew that now that number of FTEs was dipping too low. So in this budget, you are going to see requests for special educators. And I think we've already seen that because some of them we've already hired. In terms of English learner data, here you can see the calendar years of 2021, 2022, and 2023. And you get numbers here for June, September, and October. In June and October, we have SIMS reports. In September, we have beginning of year. Students who were getting ESOL instruction. And then in September of 2022, that dropped to 216, so there was a 102 student drop there. And we didn't respond right away to that because we thought, maybe this is just an anomaly. But then when we looked at 2023, the number further went down to 193 students. If we also take a look at the numbers for October, it was 278 in 2021 and then down to 213 in October. So we're kind of seeing that these numbers in here are holding steady right now, and they have certainly dropped from 2021 when we had 11 full-time teachers, and a half-time tutor. So as of today, we have 226 students who are receiving ESOL instruction and 11 full-time teachers and 1 half-time tutor. And that tutor works with 16 of our students. And that person not only, works with our kids, but also assists with screening. So if we take the 226 kids and we divide by 11, that gives us an average caseload of about 20.5 today. And that also indicates to us that the numbers might be a little bit lower because that doesn't count the 16 kids who are being seen by the tutor. So if we had 226 students next year with 10 teachers, the average caseload would be about 22.6, and we believe we can make things work well with that. Just to talk a little bit about Mr. Cotter's administrative request, going back to the numbers, in 2015-16, you can see that we had 503 students in grade 4 and 5 based on our DESE data. And today there are 684 students. So we are up 181 students. We've obviously increased our classrooms by 6 classrooms. But what we haven't done is increased any of our assistant principals. And as I had said when I spoke about this last week, the assistant principals are, and I know people would wonder, are they in fact student-facing? And I would say yes, they are. Our kids at that building love seeing their assistant principals. It's still kind of okay to have that relationship with your assistant principal because you're not too cool to do that yet. When someone files a bullying report, for example, the assistant principal conducts the investigation, but does not ever do that alone. That's something we always have 2 adults doing in Hopkinton, which means that we're pulling the school adjustment counselor to sit with the assistant principal during those investigations. And we really do interview so many students, and oftentimes we re-interview them based on things that we learned from other students. That process can eat up almost a whole week, and what that means is we're pulling school adjustment counselors out of the counseling role to do something else. And then lastly, they are people who are evaluating our educators, and when you go from 503 to 684 kids, it means you're adding a lot of educators, which means that the numbers of people that the principal and assistant principal in that building are evaluating have increased markedly since 2015-16 with no increase in admin. It's a goal to eventually get 2 assistant principals at all of those elementary levels, especially as we start to hit 400 students. The ratio of 400 children to 1 administrator is still, it's not great. Other schools have better ratios, but we make it work, and our kids are super good. So.
You mean 400 per grade?
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah, it would be 2, right now it's, yeah, gotcha. 400 per grade, so it would be 400 to 1 if we were looking at APs, right? All right, and then an administrative reduction. So there's a proposed reduction to the social emotional learning director position. Over the past 3 years having that position, we've really done a lot of designing and building of programming. Last week I walked through all of these with you. I don't necessarily know that I need to do that again, but these are all of the things that we have put into place, everything from curriculum to PBIS to the CRIOP, Massachusetts DESE frameworks, all of those things have been put into place. We're very proud of the holistic student assessment. And now we feel like those things in these buildings are things that we can probably work on maintenance. How is that going to look? So we've put the responsibilities into 3 different buckets. So the SEL curriculum and instruction will fall into Mr. Labrad's curriculum and instruction assistant superintendent role. And it will, he'll certainly be assisted by our Director of Equity and Access and by some of the subject matter leaders at the high school, some of our CTLs, all of those folks can assist with that process. When we look at some of our SEL data and Tier 1 work, and by Tier 1, we mean that when we administer the holistic student assessment, we can take a look at globally, where do we see, for example, areas that we would want kids to grow. So maybe our kids are not at a level of assertiveness or perseverance, so those kinds of things where we would want them to be, and we can deliver whole school kinds of lessons around those different skills. But when we start to talk about Tier 2 and Tier 3, that work would have always fallen to our school counselors. So That's not really a restructuring. And then as we talk about our school counseling services, that work can, when we talk about tier 2 and 3, can really be overseen by our Director of Student Services, because we now have 2 administrative positions for K to 5 and 6 to 12 that are curricular and instructional. So that takes a little bit off her plate to increase her bandwidth to work with the counselors on the HSA data and other students' SEL needs. All right, and as we always do, we like to show our per pupil expenditure. These are the most recent numbers. And you can see that Hopkinton is at $16,177. We've been using this grouping of 32 for probably the last 5 years. Hopkinton is always down in this area, and we are not complaining about it. What we are trying to illustrate is that we are really fiscally conservative. We're getting a very good product at a very good price. This is per pupil expenditure broken down again by even further by bucket. So this is all Hopkinton here. What you see on the top grouping is fiscal year 21. Below you see fiscal year 22. It's the most current data. If Hopkinton is in the top 30%, we've put a green ring around the number. If we are in the bottom 50%, we put a blue ring around it. And if we are in the bottom 25, we put a red ring around it. And so again, you can see that we are not high ranking of the 321 school districts in terms of per pupil expenditure in several categories. And yet again, I think that we are really delivering a pretty good product without having to kind of break the bank, so to speak. And now I will hand this over to Mrs. Rothmick, who can talk about the dollars and cents.
Thank you. So our fiscal year 25 operating budget, the salary increase is 2.2 million, which is 3.77%. The expense increase of 947,000 or 1.58%, representing an increase of 3,207,037 for a total operating budget of 63,144,790, and that represents an increase of 5.35%.
That's all built in, right, through negotiations?
I'm sorry?
That's all built in through negotiation?
Which part?
The salary increases?
Yes, collective bargaining
Yes.
agreements, yes. And as a reminder, we also use several revolving accounts to offset this operating budget. So you can see we use the parking revolving, building use, bus revolving, preschool, athletics, international tuition, and circuit breaker. So the total revolving offsets is 3,499,000, which represents an increase of 802,000 from the FY24 operating budget. Now, the majority of that came from the circuit breaker increase, which is a reflection of the 14% out-of-district tuition increases that we received last year. Circuit breaker is always a year later reimbursement. But there's also a $90,000 increase in the use for the preschool revolving and a $100,000 increase in the athletic revolving.
Could you explain international tuition?
So we have students that come from international countries, and they pay tuition to attend our high school.
Got it.
So again, looking at the operating budget, and again, this is general fund, the request for FY25 is a $63,144,000. The revolving offsets that we just spoke about, it represents $3,499,000. And the special education reserve, which we have been utilizing for the last couple of years at $1,094,000, so that is level funded request from the prior year. So the gross operating budget for the Hopkinton School District is $67,738,000. So when you break this out by educational programs, you can see that the majority of the expenses are represented in regular education at 54%, student services at 24%, and then just very small percentages for transportation, central office, buildings and grounds, technology, and athletics. Just a visual representation. And of course, municipals and school districts, really the driving force is your salary. The majority of your budget, operating budget, is in salary. That is because you are a service industry. So you can see that about 80% of the operating budget is salary and 20% is expense. And that has held true for many years. So breaking this down, looking at just salaries, the contractual obligations for FY '25 is $1,557,000, and staff requests represent $701,000. So we like to break the operating budget into buckets, if you will, just to make it more digestible. So again, you can see the contractual salary increase of $1,557,000. Staff requests for special education, $246,000. And this is been reduced, this request, by the increased use of the revolving and grant funding. Instructional cost and enrollment growth of $241,000, representing 2.95 FTEs. Nothing for instructional program enhancements, and support at $213,000, representing 2.9 FTEs. Again, the salary increase of $2,259,000, which represents 9.45 FTEs. Drilling those down a little further, student services, 3.5 FTE of teaching, and that is in Elmwood, the middle school and the high school. 5.0 FTEs for paraprofessionals, and that is within Marathon, Elmwood, and Hopkins. 5.2 FTE is offset by a $121,000 increase in grants and $90,000 of the preschool revolving. And lastly, a 0.3 FTE for administrative support. For instructional cost and enrollment growth, the 2.95 FTEs, 2.95 in teaching is Marathon 0.5, Elmwood 1.2, Hopkins at 0.05, high school at 1, and middle school at 0.2. And those were outlined a couple slides earlier by Dr. Kavanaugh. Also, the 1.0 FTE ESOL reduction, and the 1.0 FTE middle school ELA director, who is a current employee, and this position has been covered by a grant for the last 2 years, and also an increase in substitutes. Again, the instructional program enhancements at 0. Administration, support, and facility enhancements, the 2.9 FTEs, 1.0 FTE Hopkins assistant principal, 1.0 building and grounds assistant director, 1.0 custodian, a 0.5 athletic trainer, coaches stipends. However, that has also been offset by a $100,000 increase use in the athletic revolving. Technology summer help, 0.4 FTE administrative assistant for the assistant superintendent, and again, offset by a 1.0 reduction in the SEL director. Moving into expenses, the expense increase again is $947,826. Taking those visually by educational program, you can see that student services represents the majority at 30%, moving into transportation at 20%, building and grounds and technology at 17 and 15%. And those percentage, most of this really does represent contractual obligations for those expenses. So again, using those same buckets for contractual inflation and current services, an increase of $283,000, and that is within transportation, technology, building and grounds, and other. Student services, an increase of $190,000 in transportation, out-of-district tuition, and contracted services. And instructional cost, enrollment growth, and replacement cycles, an increase of $473,000, and that is within transportation, technology, and FF&E. Taking that further down, the contractual inflation and current services, there's an increase in the transportation contract for $84,000. Technology, there's an increase in the student information systems and hardening of our security of our systems and inflation for $115,000. Building and grounds, grounds maintenance for $21,000. Contracted services, which are new preventive maintenance contracts, and repair and maintenance of $18,000. And then others, regular education increase of $38,000, offset by the occupational day decrease of $49,000, athletics increase of $21,000. Student services, the increase is transportation represents $99,000 increase. Tuitions decreased by $67,000, and again, a reminder, we have an increased use of $612,000 for circuit breaker that offsets these tuitions. Contracted services, an increase of $142,000. For instructional costs, enrollment growth, and replacement cycles, transportation, increase of $212,000. This represents 2 additional buses and adding tiers to the existing buses. Technology, increase for leases, replacement cycle, and projector replacements. And FF&E, $67,000, and this is for copier leases and classroom furniture. So taking both the salary and expenses and putting these buckets together, your contractual inflation and current services increase is $1,841,000. Special education, $436,000, 3.6 FTEs. Instructional cost enrollment growth, $715,000, 2.95 FTEs. And administration, support, and facility enhancements, $213,000, or 2.9 FTEs. And just taking those same, but putting in your percentages. So the contractual inflation and current services increase represents 3.07% increase. Special education, a 0.73% increase. Instructional cost and enrollment growth, a 1.19% increase. And administration, support, and facility enhancements, a 0.36% increase. And again, the total requested increase is 5.35%. And just again, we've spoken about the capital plan in many different venues. So a reminder of where we are with the capital plan. The end-of-life replacement cycle is a vehicle for $80,000. However, that will be paid for from the parking revolving and not a request to the community. Technology district-wide, $100,000. HVAC district-wide, $700,000. The high school track and field at $350,000 for the design and engineering. From an enrollment growth perspective, the Marathon Playground at $1 million, and the Hopkins School addition at $46,743,000.
Great. Thank you. Questions from the committee?
I have a couple.
Go.
So with the special education reserve being level funded and with you seeing the rise in special education needs each year, is the reasoning behind it because the circuit breaker increase over the last year, or
So you have three buckets, if you will, to pay for the tuitions. You have the general fund, the operating budget, you have circuit breaker, and you have the special education reserve. So the increase in the circuit breaker allowed for a decrease in what was budgeted in the operating budget. So we had a huge 14% increase in the 24, what fiscal year we're in the 24 operating budget. So that budget went very high, to reflect that 14% increase. Now for the 25 budget, student changes, we're not having that 14% increase, but now we're getting that year later of circuit breaker.
Got it.
So all those things together, you see the general fund and request for tuitions went down, but there still is that need for the reserve,
Right.
adding everything together.
The other, if I can piggyback onto, and please jump in where, if I don't say this correctly, but the other piece about the special education reserve fund is that ultimately it's intended for us to have a reserve fund for unforeseen things. But we have been using this is the third year or second year we've had it?
I think third.
Third. So we have, the need that we've had for it has been all of the money that we got to it, so we actually have not had a reserve to be able to use. Question on that I have is, are we anticipating that we're going to expend all of the reserve this year the way we've had to the past?
Okay, at this time, I would say yes. As you know, placements change.
Yes.
So the way we're trending right now, we will use the full reserve.
That was what I expected. The other piece of that you would appreciate from budgeting is that the special ed reserve fund is intended to have that reserve, but it also doesn't add into what our base is for the budget for looking at next year. So that's not included in what our base will be for
Right.
that time FY26.
Yeah, so it does not get indexed with, an increase each year.
Right.
So our
Much more
intention
eloquently
is to
said than I did.
keep it level.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your.
No, I mean, you're just refreshing my memory on some of these things. So, the other question I had just was around the instructional program enhancements being at 0. Was that decision based on recommendations from the building principals and what the needs were, or was it based on curriculum needs? I guess that's what.
There were
I was just
really
trying-
no requests.
There were no requests.
Yeah.
That's an interesting bucket that we've had at 0 for a few years, and I agree, I have a question on that too, because I think we do fund a lot of innovative programming through grants. And when, there's a lot of grant money that supports, sort of innovation, at least in the trial phase. But I do often wonder, what would hit that bucket? Like, so much of what we're doing is driven by enrollment growth and delivering on the curriculum. Would it be if we added a bilingual program or so, would it be a completely new program that would be reflected in that bucket? Like if we added, I don't know, computer science, say, as a K-12. Hypothetically, computer science curriculum, or something like that. It would be a completely new program likely that would hit that bucket versus maintenance and improvements in the existing programming, which hits typically like enrollment growth, or, is that right?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to note, and we probably talked about this last year too, the importance of there is no stagnation. Built in in my budget in particular, money that is identified, it moves the curriculum forward, moves instructional practices forward, either through professional development or through a new textbook, a new interactive software program, things like that. So we're moving forward in very thoughtful and incremental ways. But I would argue, Amanda, what you're saying, that would fall outside of that norm. Part of the oxygen we breathe is these new things that we're doing all the time. But the examples you're bringing up are pretty significant, and those would probably fall outside of what we're doing on a day-to-day.
And if we did introduce something like that, it would hit that category.
Yeah,
Whereas-
I mean, to your point, if we were to start an entire new program, which would require X number of teachers, X number of materials for that, that would be that program, new program, if you will.
So would something like the change in building structure with the grades that are being proposed with some of the building changes, would that fall into that bucket where you needed to have some changes for building? Or is it really looking at the entire curriculum for the district?
So when we're looking at, say for instance, Hopkins going to a 5-6, it may be that, you know, this teacher is not really, maybe the curriculum is shifting a little bit, but it's not requiring a new person. So, and it may not require materials, it just may be a little bit of a shift in terms of when students are introduced to something that they will be introduced to, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
As opposed to, we need a new teacher for this classroom because they're now going to get X.
Got it.
With the potential of the change in the related arts at the Hopkins as a lower middle school, would that be something that would potentially hit that? I know we haven't flushed all of that out yet, but if we're looking at moving some of the related arts that are currently offered at the middle school to include fifth graders, that would seem like it would potentially require increased staff in targeted areas.
So that one's a little tricky because you're also you may be adding staff because it's an enrollment increase. You know,
Fair.
so
Yep.
you're adding staff, that's an enrollment increase. So you're, say for instance, your art teacher who is at the middle school now that sixth grade shifts down, as a for instance, that teacher may come down, but now different programs may be offered to fifth grade that were not offered before. So that would be a program change, however, it doesn't require anything. Does that make sense? But if
It
you're
does,
going to
yep.
bring in additional teaching, then it's also enrollment growth. So that one's a little tricky to slice.
Yep.
That was all I have.
Okay. Other? Anything?
I just have a couple questions. On the SEL numbers, the June, you don't have to bring it up, it's okay. The June numbers were fairly consistent while the October and September, or the other two buckets were very different. Do you have a read on that? Or is that, am I seeing that?
No, the only thing that comes to mind, and you can certainly jump in if something else comes to your mind, the kids take access tests in January.
Okay.
And so then they can get released from the program
Okay.
if they,
What's an access test?
it's the standardized test that you take to see if you are proficient in reading, writing, speaking, and listening as a person whose first language is not English.
Two other questions. I think this probably would just wash through, but curious, again, when we show the revolving accounts, we've been talking about food service headcount, and I know that is funded from that account. It somehow doesn't seem to get reflected. Like when you have the page that talks about which revolving accounts we tap for budget, it doesn't, it's on the list. So I guess I wonder why not? I mean, just, is there a reason why, or is it just because it just washes through? It's,
Well, because the food service is a self-funded
Yeah.
account, so we're not asking the community
yeah,
to, you know, budget for these things. So while we come to the school committee to request increase in positions or whatever it is, but the food service is always self-funded.
right.
So,
So it would wash right out. It-
yeah, we don't really, because it's not a presentation to the community asking them for money.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think people, it's probably confusing to the community because we do vote these positions and then we talk about it, it's not here, but it makes complete sense because it is self-funded. And, let's see. And just clarification on the special ed head count. The 4 paraprofessionals that were originally targeting this year that we couldn't fill, that we converted to the two teachers. I know we've retained those in the budget for next year. Are those part, is it like the is it 5.0 or 5.1 FT, is that included?
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you. That's it for me.
I just had one question. In looking at, I know the circuit breaker money offsets what we have for tuition, but there is a little bit of an increase above what that is. Is that reflective of an increase in number of out-of-district students, so more tuitions, or reflective of an increase in the tuition for those students that we do have out of district?
It really is all cost-driven. You have a threshold, and so it won't matter what the numbers are. All that matters is the amount and how much over threshold for what your circuit breaker change is. I don't know the exact count.
Okay, that was more, I was looking partially at the budget, but also at a piece of looking. 35 sounds, to my recollection, in line with where we've been in past years, but I couldn't swear to that,
In numbers of students out of district.
in numbers of students out of district. That's,
Yeah, but keep in mind, some students that may be at a collaborative may not hit threshold. It's kind of close.
okay. In some point down the line, it would be interesting just to have that comparison. If the 35 out of district is trending in line with our overall enrollment growth with the number of students we've had in previous years, or if there's an increase or decrease related to our ability to meet students' needs in the district.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a table with 3
Yeah,
columns.
but
How many
it-
kids do you have out of district? How many kids on IEPs and how many kids total in the district? And see if, like, proportionally they line up.
That would be great, not urgent, just would be interesting for us to have. I also am aware that the Appropriations Chair, Mike Manning, is here. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask?
No, it's basically the same as last week. I asked questions.
Okay, so we're good with that. Thank you for all of the time and the little bit of additional information. Can the newer version go up on the website as well, just because it does
Sure
have some
thing.
interesting little tidbits for people? Okay, so that brings us into new business item B, which is the Elmwood gift account.
Okay, let me get to the gift account. Okay, so we have a memo here from Mr. Broninger. He is asking that you accept checks from the Scholastic Book Fair in the amounts of $634.05, $2,601.02, $507.99, and $76.74.
Is there
So
a
the
motion?
total? Yep.
The total is equal to what's in the,
Yes, $3,185.75 altogether.
fabulous.
I move to accept that the $3,185.75 for the Elmwood School gift account be accepted.
Motion by Susan, is there a second on that?
Second.
Second by Lori, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that is unanimous and brings us into item C, which is the increased food service staff FTE. Mrs. Rothermere.
Thank you. So you can see the request for the marathon kitchen manager, the Elmwood kitchen manager, and the food service clerk. A slight increase in their hours per day. And this represents really what they're currently working. So we just want to ask the school committee to allow that increase. So it's a half an hour a day for the marathon, 3/4 of an hour a day for the Elmwood, and an hour and a half for the food service clerk.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the committee? Great to go back to your comment before, which that this is fully funded under the food service
Correct.
revolving. Is there somebody who would like to make a motion on that?
Find it, hang on.
I'm gonna cheat. Hold on.
I got it. Okay, I will make a motion to approve the food service department increase in positions as listed.
Okay, motion by Amanda, second by Susan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
All right, I think we can do that, because the correct thing is in the packet. The
Okay.
incorrect link is on.
Okay,
I think
so
it's fine.
we will move into the tech, item D. Dr. Kavanaugh?
Sure. So you know that we are members of the Tech Collaborative, the Education Collaborative. And, you know, part of, I think the advantages of being there, you know, you get people who are collaborating on special education services. Sometimes they offer transportation services. Sometimes you have professional development services. So collaboratives are wonderful things to belong to. But we also have to know what they're doing in those places. And you as a school committee need to approve their annual report. And so what you have in your packet, I think, is the entire annual report. I think that the link that's actually in the agenda shows their financial report. But what you're really approving here is the FY23 annual report from the Education Collaborative.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Okay, is there somebody who would like to make a motion then?
Sorry, Dr. Kavanaugh, but whatever I read was lengthy and financially driven. It was dense and didn't have a lot of, or really anything that segmented out the member districts. Like
So
what
did you
Hopkinton.
click on it through
I think I
the
don't.
agenda? Or did you look in the packet?
I think I was in the attachments in our folder. I think I might have gone that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we should just wait till next week to make
Yep.
sure that the correct document is the one that everyone has seen.
Well, just curious, does the actual annual report, is it strictly financial? Is it also the services provided and member
No.
communities and?
Yes, it does services provided and,
Okay.
you know, what are the profiles of the kids who go to the various schools that,
Oh, I would love to read that before.
okay.
It's
yep,
okay,
it
because I
is in
didn't,
the let's
packet,
put
yep.
that up.
I was in the
Wonderful.
wrong thing. I was trying to follow the financials and the audit and
Yep,
it was a good reading, but it wasn't helpful
Oh,
for
no.
understanding where Hopkinton's piece, really,
Correct,
you know, how it
yeah.
related to us, so. I appreciate it. Is it okay if we wait?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yep.
Okay, so that then brings us into item E.
Yes, so this one may not be okay for us to wait, but I think that you've been able to read the memo that we received from Emily Parks, who's their new executive director. What Tech wants to do is simply to increase the amount that they can put in their capital reserve fund. And it's going to be a huge increase because currently the limit that they can put into their capital reserve fund is $750,000, and they want to go to $3,500,000. And you can sort of see the reasons for that, but where Tech is currently in Walpole, they are in a rented facility. And I don't think it's any secret that they have had like sort of ongoing issues with landlord. And what they're really kind of hoping to do is to, at some point, be able to purchase their own facility, which is why they want to accumulate those funds. It doesn't mean that we will be paying any more. It's just when there's a surplus of funds that would go into that space, and it would increase the amount of money that they are able to put there.
Did they build a pool?
Oh my goodness, they have a beautiful therapeutic pool
That's,
there. Yeah.
I had toured that at one point. I didn't realize that was as much of a problem as this.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you know, one of the things that is on the list here is renovations and upgrades to an educational facility. They are currently one of the programs is housed in a middle school in Walpole, and I believe that they are going to be moving the kids out of there and into a new space, so, also in Walpole.
I had one question about it, just like clearly when I saw the increase, I was like, wow, that's giant. But at the same, what I was really wondering is, and forgive me for not remembering, but like, do we have a contribution amount to that? And is it at all impacted by them increasing their budget?
We do have a contribution amount, but it will not be impacted by this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they didn't do this, would it mean that they would have to basically spend all but $750,000 of their capital on an annual basis? Like,
It
does
would
this
mean they
allow them
couldn't
just to
exceed that.
reserve it, to tuck it away so that they can build for long range or bigger projects?
Yeah, it would mean, you know, kind of like our special ed reserve fund, like I can't spend more than that $1,094,000, they can't spend more than the $750,000.
Okay. That is very limiting if they're trying to do anything significant.
there's somebody who would like to make a motion relative to this.
So, the thing here is, you can certainly make a motion to approve it, but you don't need to. What they are asking member districts to do is if you don't want to do it, to make a motion to not
Okay.
approve it, so.
That's why the TBD and the.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Is there anybody who objects to this that feels that we should not do it? Okay. Then we will move on to the Hopkins Lower Middle School renovation. Oh, sorry,
Before we
go
move on,
ahead.
I don't oppose, but I know that it says if a district doesn't take a vote within 45 days or something, that it's assumed to approve. But we are meeting, do we want to? I mean,
Oh, yeah, you can certainly approve it if you want to do that.
I just was curious. I mean, I think the default, if they don't hear from you, is that it's a yes. So we could go default mode, or we could go,
Probably better to be on record.
Yeah. I'm good with that.
I would just assume be on record.
Okay.
I guess I'll make a
the motion
motion.
with
Yeah.
I guess I'll start making a motion. I want to move to approve the move to approve the requested tech capital reserve fund balance increase from 750,000 to 3,500,000.
Okay. Motion by Amanda. Is there a second on that?
I'll second.
Second by Susan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So that is unanimous and passes. All right. So that brings us into item F, which is the Hopkins Lower Middle School school renovation.
And thank you. So this evening, I did forward both the letter of recommendation and the vendor's proposal. And we do apologize for that being late because Perkins Eastman was still negotiating with the vendor, so it took for us to get that together. So you do have that in an email tonight. But basically what this is, as we moved into schematic design for the Hopkins addition, the decision was made to use the geothermal wells as the HVAC plant for the addition and then potentially to expand into the old building. When we brought the designer on board, Perkins Eastman, that decision had not been made. So he did not carry an allowance within that contract for a geothermal test well. So what is before you tonight is the proposal to make an amendment to their contract for the $58,300 to have this vendor drill a test well that will give us the information on how big the well field would need to be for the Hopkins addition. It does become one of your operating wells, so it's not money thrown away. So this would become one of the functional wells should the Hopkins move forward, hopefully. So this amendment is to the Perkins contract to allow for this test well to take place.
So, question, if it becomes one of the functioning wells, does that cause an overall increase to I know relative to the full 46 million, it's a smaller percentage?
No, so the 46 million cost that is before you, the cost for the addition to be geothermal, that is already in that 46 million. But what this test well will do is it will right-size the number of wells we need. We've believe that what is in the budget is a conservative number, and this may allow us to bring that well field size down. So some decisions can be made based on this test well.
Okay.
And is the actual money, I know they said they'll move forward as quickly as possible if we approve it, is the funding part of the $3 million engineering? So
Correct.
the money's already been appropriated?
Yes.
And this is just part of it? And
So-
so the contract was not written, and this is it's just sort of administrative in terms of fixing the contract language?
Because you approved the contract for Perkins Eastman for a fixed amount,
Yeah.
this is an increase to their contract, so you do need to approve that increase to their contract.
Gotcha, okay. Is there suggested language that we need specific?
I would say that you move to approve the increase to the Perkins Eastman contract in the amount of $58,300 for the purpose of a test geothermal well.
Somebody that would like to make that motion?
You could just say so moved.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Amanda. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Second by Lori. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you for bringing that
Thank you.
up. Okay. That then brings us into the Hopkinton Middle School stipend supplement, the robotics advisor. That's you, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you. So we currently have two people working at the middle school in robotics. We have someone who is formerly the grade 7, grade 8 robotics advisor. In grade 6, they do not go to competition, but because the program has gotten so big that now we have a person in grade 6 who sort of preps the kids for grade 7 and 8. There is not a stipend in place currently for the grade 6 person. This is a little bit of a different program, I think, because it's instructional in nature. So what she's doing is really creating learning modules for each week, and the kids engage in the learning module. She communicates with them sometimes in person, predominantly virtually, but there are 3 in-person learning days that she holds throughout the year. So I am aware that we have just a regular stipend for clubs at $550. But what we're hoping to do is give her a $1,000 stipend because there really is an instructional piece in that. I know when we were talking about the stipends, we looked at things that we as a community really value. This one feels like it's part of the things that we value in terms of robotics. The program has grown, I would say, exponentially over the last few years at the middle school. And I think that the instructional piece in this makes it just a little bit different from a club such as, ping pong or board games, because the prep work on this it's extensive.
Are there questions?
Does the motion need to include the amount of the stipend?
I think that's probably a good idea.
It's a good idea. I don't know, Amanda, did you have questions?
I have been wrestling with what kind of stipend this should be. When we did the contract negotiation with the teachers last go-around, we revamped the stipends and categorized a lot of them. So the interscholastic competitive stipends were at a certain tier, as Dr. Kavanaugh referenced, so that's where robotics typically falls, and it's a higher tier, and there's more involvement, whatever. The clubs that meet like once a week, typically once a week, but are more sort of recreational student interest driven, are, at a much lower tier. It's a lower lift tends to be a lower lift for the advisor who is attending to, oversee and add some structure, but not as hands-on and curriculum focused. But this, so we have Girls Who Code, I think, or Girls Coding Club, whatever it's called at the middle school, is one of those weekly ones at the lower tier, as is the Swift, I think, Coding Club. So the coding clubs are at the lower tier, which is about half of this. The robotics programs, and this is kind of a feeder to the competitive one, so it's sort of like a JV almost. Those are at the competitive tier. So I'm just I've been wrestling a little bit with where this belongs, just to get it right. I can definitely see the argument for it being at the $1,000 level. I mean, in any case, these are really honorariums. This is not, we've never configured the stipends to be time and materials or anything. They're honorariums, and most of these folks, if it were an hourly rate, they're all working way more than these reflect. So anyway, it's a long way around to say I am comfortable with the 1,000. But for anyone who might be thinking, is it more like a club? I think it's because of the instructional nature, even though maybe the teacher isn't doing in-person learning every week. The curriculum is being rolled out, you say, every week?
Every week, yes.
Do we have any idea how many kids are interested in the 6th grade?
I do not know how many kids are in this group.
Apologies, I didn't ask that earlier for you, but I'm comfortable with it. I think it's great. I mean, I love the robotics program. I think it's great that we have so many people interested. The idea, I coached robotics in the middle school level way back when, and there is a lot to be said for taking time to build that foundation of knowledge, because it's a lot to learn the teamwork, engineering practices, and robotics, and coding. That's a whole lot to take on in a competition setting, so I do like it. That's all. Those are all my thoughts. I don't really have any questions, but I have given it some thought. I think it's great.
Other thoughts, questions?
So I didn't realize that there was like the tiered approach with stipends. And so how many tiers are there?
Looking back, so student, level one those were like competitive extracurriculars, and people can find this in the teacher's contract, but the competitive extracurriculars. Then we had level two were like student interest clubs. Level three were student production oriented clubs like drama. Or, things of that nature. Level four, I think was quite small, but elementary student clubs, and there might have been one or two. And then there was a set of four professional stipends related to the duties of the teachers. So instructional supervision and leadership was a level, supervisory duties and coordinators, student group administration like class officers, class advisors and that sort of thing, and then hourly support. So those were the different tiers. And just to get some equity across the types of programming, and that's sort of how we bucket it. So 4 for student activities and 4 for more professional work that the teachers do.
This was new too in the current teacher contract that expires next year. Amanda worked extensively, so that's why I always look on the piece of the contract having to do with the clubs.
We had a joint subcommittee with the teachers that we looked at this together.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I guess I just, like, when you brought that up, I just wondered, are you feeling like this runs afoul of what you decided, or is it just doesn't fit squarely into one of the categories, so that's why you're struggling?
I think it didn't fit exactly squarely because they're not yet competing as currently envisioned in grade 6. But it is a feeder to grade 7, 8 where they are competing. So I think it is possible even that next year I could see them doing a scrimmage with another school. You never know. Like I feel like we don't really know where it's going to go, but it's more of an adjunct to the competitive one. So the top competitive tiers I think are like at $3,500 for like the robotics club advisor at the high school. The assistant is more like $1,000. So keeping it, we have similar stipends. This one just doesn't exactly fit the mold. But close enough, I think.
Yeah.
Is there somebody that would like to make a motion?
Having said all that, I'll make a motion if you want. One moment.
And do you want to include the $1,000 to $1,000 value?
Yes. I will move to approve the stipend for the VR, assuming that's Vex Robotics, VR coding club in the amount of $1,000.
Motion by Amanda. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Second by Lori. All those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous and so passes. And that brings us down into item H, which is the Hopkins Middle School Ping Pong Club stipend.
Okay, this one is far more straightforward. We are looking for approval to begin a ping pong club and pay the advisor $550.
In the
Sorry, we're retiring word masters, I think, right? I think that's what they said.
Yeah. That was the piece that I was going to highlight.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I move to approve the ping pong club at stipend of $550.
Motion by Susan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lori. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that is also unanimous and passes, in that there are no old business items for us to attend to. Do people have future agenda items that you want to throw out to make sure that if it's not already on our radar, that it is for agenda planning purposes? Okay, then that brings us into items by consensus.
Okay. As superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Amanda. Is there a second? Second by Susan. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And that is unanimous and so carries. And that then moves us into adjournment. Is there somebody who would like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Lori. Is there a second? Second by Susan. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And we are adjourned at 8:35. This is the final meeting for 2023. Our next meeting will be on January 4th, 2024. And that will be, again, a superintendent budget recommendation and regular meeting. And then our public hearing is January 11th. and we will have a regular meeting and a budget vote on the FY25 budget on January 18th. Thank you all, and have a happy new year. Night.